It was a quiet morning. Just me, some tools, and the dock I was building off my lake cabin. But that tranquility was shattered when Lynette Boyd, a woman in her 50s, stormed across my yard, waving a rulebook like it was a sword. She began shouting, accusing me of violating community shoreline rules, as if I were building a casino instead of sinking a single post into the lake bed. Before I could even respond, she whipped out her phone and called 911, claiming I was tampering with community waters. Here's the kicker. I wasn't building on anyone else's property. I was standing on my own land, constructing a small fishing dock I'd dreamed about for years. And just like that, my peaceful morning morphed into a full-blown HOA spectacle, complete with gawking neighbors and threats of fines. Has your HOA ever lost its mind over something as harmless as this? Drop your story in the comments below, or let me know what you think of Lynette's over-the-top reaction. Now, I work in lake restoration and deal with water boundaries and property laws daily, so trust me when I say I know exactly where my land begins and ends. That morning in late spring, I was finally getting around to building my dream dock. The sun was just hitting the water perfectly, casting shimmering reflections that reminded me of why I fell in love with this property in the first place. I'd hammered the first post into the lake bed, water dripping from my gloves, when I heard rapid footsteps charging toward me like someone was fleeing a fire. "Stop right there." Lynette's voice echoed across the lawn, as if I were committing a crime. Behind her was her trusty sidekick, Dale Ramsey, an older man who looked like he might have taken his glasses out of a novelty store, holding his phone like he was documenting a crime scene. These two had appointed themselves the self-declared enforcers of every neighborhood rule, written or imagined. When they saw my dock project, they treated it like I was building a nuclear reactor in my backyard. "What in the hell do you think you're doing, Porter?" Lynette shrieked, pointing at the lone wooden post as if it were evidence of mass destruction. "That's community water you're violating. At least 3 HOA lake rules." She flung her rulebook in the air dramatically, while Dale circled us with his camera, muttering under his breath about documenting evidence. I calmly set down my hammer, wiped my hands on a rag, and gave them the kind of patient smile you give kids when they ask why the sky isn't purple. As I did, I noticed neighbors stopping to watch, phones in hand, some even slowing their cars to catch a glimpse. Mrs. Peterson across the street, phone raised, shook her head with the "here we go again" look. It seemed like half the block had tuned in for Lynette's latest HOA drama. "Good morning, Lynette, Dale," I said as I pulled out a neatly folded stack of official documents from my back pocket, complete with bright red city stamps all over them. "I've got a completely legal building permit for this dock, and just to refresh your memory, this lake is entirely on my property." Lynette froze, her eyes glued to the documents like they were written in a foreign language. She blinked, looked back at my post, then back at me, her mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. "You're claiming this lake belongs to you?" Her voice started as a whisper, then escalated into a near shout. "This lake has been community property since 1995. You're destroying our shared landscape." Dale, still recording, nodded vigorously behind her, as if he was documenting the crime of the century. It was almost comical. Two people convinced I was some kind of criminal mastermind when all I wanted was a simple fishing dock. Then Lynette pulled out her phone, striking a pose for the camera like she was about to make a dramatic courtroom plea. But before dialing, she paused, checked her hair in the phone's reflection, and smoothed it down. Even in the middle of a supposed crisis, she cared more about her appearance. "If you don't stop this construction right now, I'm calling the police," she threatened. I shrugged and returned to my work, picking up the second post I planned to install. "Feel free, Lynette, but I'm not stopping." That's when she completely lost it. Her face turned from red to purple, and she started jabbing at her phone like it owed her money. The sound of the dialing tone echoed over the lake as Dale continued filming, capturing every ridiculous angle. At this point, I half expected to see a dramatic reenactment notice pop up on the screen. Dale, acting like a neighborhood spy, even whipped out a measuring tape and started recording the distance from my dock post to the shoreline, as if this measurement would be the key to unlocking my guilt. Then, just when I thought the situation couldn't get more absurd, Lynette called 911. Dale positioned himself behind her, ready to record what he likely thought was the final piece of evidence. A police cruiser arrived about 15 minutes later, And the officer who stepped out immediately had that patient, I've seen it all expression on his face. Lynette rushed to him, breathless, ready to spill her tale of my criminal activity. Officer, this man is building a structure on our community lake without permission. He's violating multiple neighborhood rules. Lynette almost gasped for air, her voice frantic. Dale, still filming, nodded and took notes like he was preparing for his first case at law school. The officer turned to me and asked, "Permit?" I handed over the documents, and the officer flipped through them, scanning the clear lines and red stamps. Then, he turned back to Lynette and said, "Ma'am, Mr. Porter has all the proper permits. According to these property boundaries, the lake does appear to be within his legal ownership. I don't see any violations here." Lynette froze, her mouth opening in shock. "This can't be right," she sputtered, her mind struggling to accept reality. "This lake belongs to the community," she insisted, her voice rising. The officer, now done with this absurdity, calmly explained that any property disputes would need to be sorted through civil channels, not by involving the police. Once the officer left, I knew Lynette's true harassment campaign was just beginning. Fines for tall grass, shiny car paint, and even noisy birds, each one signed by Lynette with Dale's blurry evidence. As if this wasn't enough, Dale took up his role as the unofficial neighborhood private investigator, lurking around my property with binoculars and a bizarre array of spy gear. But the final straw came when Lynette delivered a hand-drawn map of my property, complete with redrawn lake boundaries and fake legal citations to support her delusions. It was time to fight fiction with facts. I dove into the property records, pulled up satellite imagery, and downloaded the official documents that proved I owned everything. No room for debate. I wasn't about to let them manipulate the situation any longer. Armed with undeniable evidence, I was ready to end this once and for all. But Lynette and Dale hadn't seen the last of me. They may have thought they could control the neighborhood, but I was about to turn the tables on them, and they wouldn't know what hit them. Permits and property documents, a battle for transparency and fairness. I've always believed that the enjoyment of shared spaces should be open to all. That's why, when I began working on my small fishing dock, I made sure to have all the right permits and documentation to prove my intentions were nothing but respectful. I never had any intention of restricting anyone's enjoyment of the lake area. There were no fences in my plan, no admission fees, and certainly no barriers to the shoreline paths that had been in place for years. All I wanted was a small dock where I could fish and occasionally launch a kayak. To my surprise, most of the neighbors were relieved and even supportive once they understood my intentions. I wasn't a property hoarding monster as some had feared. But despite this, I could feel Lynette's whispers of doubt still spreading like wildfire, casting a shadow over the neighborhood. It was then that Mrs. Allen, an elderly widow who lived at the corner of the block, came by one evening. She'd always been quiet, someone I had barely spoken to in the 5 years I'd lived here. But seeing my official documents had given her the courage to speak up. She shared a story that made my heart ache. "You're the first person who's ever stood up to them like this," she said, tears welling in her eyes. 3 years ago, I planted a small lavender garden in my front yard. Lynette made me tear it out because she said it could cause allergic reactions for people walking by. I'd been growing lavender for 40 years, and I had to destroy it all because of some made-up rule that wasn't even in the HOA covenant. That moment shifted my perspective. This wasn't just about my dock or my lake. It was about a pattern of bullying that had been going on for years. I was just the first one with the resources and documentation to fight back. Later that evening, I sent an email to the neighborhood mailing list, attaching the official satellite imagery and offering to meet anyone who had questions about property boundaries or lake access. I kept the tone calm, friendly, and informative, focusing on transparency and good neighborly relations. Within an hour, my phone rang off the hook. Residents who had never seen the satellite evidence before were finally waking up to the truth, realizing that they'd been misinformed by HOA leadership for years. But as I built support through facts and open communication, my security camera system sent an alert at 11:47 that night. I opened the app and saw 2 dark figures moving near my dock with tools in hand. One was smaller, possibly female, and the other was stockier, exactly matching Lynette and Dale's builds. I grabbed a cup of coffee, settled into my chair, and braced myself for what was sure to be the most incriminating evidence I could have hoped for. The emergency HOA meeting Lynette called for that evening was nothing short of theatrical. It felt like I was watching a courtroom drama unfold. Lynette had managed to pull together about 20 residents on short notice, and she opened the meeting with all the drama of a seasoned prosecutor. Fellow residents, we are facing an unprecedented threat to our community values and property rights, she declared, pacing back and forth in front of the room. Graham Porter is attempting to commercialize our beloved community lake, turning it into his personal business venture. Dale sat in the front row, nodding along, holding up printed copies of what seemed to be fake news articles about property disputes in other neighborhoods. Lynette's presentation was complete with hand-drawn charts, printed photographs, and fabricated claims. But I was ready. Armed with the truth, the facts, and the support of my neighbors, I knew this was far from over.